That's a good thing, though. I mean, that gives the public lots of time to see it.
911. Shed those tears. You hold those tears back, Bev. He's entertaining, as we saw last night.
Okay. Okay. So fast.
He actually he threw that chair.
I know. 1 minute to go.
You know? And he pushed that one off.
He pushed into me.
I was like,
I gave him the night off.
Good evening. Call to order of a special commission meeting to consider the trash and disposal fee. It's for Tuesday, July 7th, 2020. And if you'll stand to say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. We're going to go ahead and conduct the special commission meeting first, and then as time permits, we will continue with the regular city commission meeting and the unfinished agenda items from the July 6th meeting last night. So I think we have only one agenda item to consider tonight, Mr. Tredick, and this is a fee, a non-ad valorem fee for the collection and disposal of household waste, yard, trash, and special waste and recyclables.
Mayor, we should do a roll call for
Okay,
tonight.
all right. Please, a roll call, thank you.
Mayor England,
Here?
Vice Mayor Costa,
Here.
Commissioner George,
Here.
Commissioner Rumwell,
Here.
Commissioner Samora.
Here.
Thank you.
Mr. Tredick, you may begin.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. I want to do a brief overview of what has gotten us to this point. It's been a long journey, about a year long. I sent out some slides, which I'm going to put up here, and I'll give a copy to Beverly for the record, which I want to go through. And you'll each get a copy, and I believe I emailed them, so I'm hoping the people at home also, the commissioners that are not present or that are Zooming in also have copies. So this is a public hearing, special commission meeting, public hearing concerning the setting of fees for the non-ad valorem assessment for the collection and disposal of household waste, yard waste, and recyclables. I've got to get this thing to advance. All right. That's not supposed to happen. Sorry about that. So a little background, how we got to where we are. The current non-ad valorem assessment was first levied in 2012. It was set at $74 per year per household. It pays for a portion of the disposal costs. Hasn't changed since it was created in 2012. It's still $74. And the collection costs and the remainder of the disposal costs, as well as recyclables, are paid for from the general fund. So it really only covers a portion of our costs for solid waste. So in June 17th, this item was discussed, and there's actually, at the time, it was talked about setting it at $222 per year, which would have been a $148 increase. It still wouldn't have covered the full cost. It only would have affected residential properties, not condominiums, as they were considered commercial. But the commission wanted more information, and the item needed to come back for future commission meeting. So the item item came back in September of 2019. There was a presentation done at the time. The cost estimate was $460 per year per household. There was some commission concern regarding the high cost. I'm going to have to do this. This mess doesn't breathe as well as my other one. Cleanup required. There was some cleanup required related to commercial properties paying the current fee, the revenue. It was discussed where would the revenue go. It would go into a special fund for the solid waste, and only developed lots would be assessed. And the motion passed to increase the non-ad valorem assessment. So that was back in September. Came back in October. There was some discussion of timetables and actions that were necessary to implement the assessment. And the commission was told the resolution had to be adopted by January 1st, 2020, and it had to be advertised 4 consecutive weeks. Also that there would be additional steps necessary in the spring, and commission had consensus to continue on the journey and move forward. Came back in 11/4. The commission was notified that the 4-week advertisement had begun. The first advertisement happened on 11/2019. I'm not sure if you have this, the minutes for this item, because this discussion in November mostly centered around commercial, and there were no actions taken, so you may not have the backup for that, but we can certainly provide it. There wasn't a tremendous amount of discussion about the non-ad valorem on this particular, other than notifying you that the advertisement was made. On December 5th, 2019, Resolution 19-13 was put forward to express the city's intent to levy the non-ad valorem assessment. There was general discussion regarding the amount of the assessment, and there's been a lot of talk about where that needed to land. The resolution only sets intent to levy, because that was question, not the rates at that time, but at that time it was just the intent. Future action would have set rates. There was discussion about how the costs could be calculated, maybe not implementing it all at once, but doing it in phases. And at the end of the meeting, or at the end of the item, Resolution 1913 was approved. So there were a couple of meetings in between here that dealt with commercial. I didn't include those in my presentation because they're not specific to the non-ad valorem. We're going to continue to do to get that separation between commercial and residential. So we did a reanalysis of the costs. The original costs were estimated to be $460. Did quite a bit, and I presented a bunch of slides on this back in the 429 meeting. Came up with a total cost in FY19 dollars of $330. When I projected that forward to FY22, that came out to $366. And I have an asterisk there because this is something I think I may have confused things in the last commission meeting because I changed my multiplier. It was based at the time on a 3.5% increase per year. And you can see on the bottom of that slide, it also shows the individual prices for disposal, collection, and recyclable. So here's where I made Scrivener's error, and I talked about the transposing numbers. The current cost is $330 per year. We discussed on 429 the potential to further reduce costs, and set the non-ad valorem ranges were set for 50 to 150, 75 to 175, and 0 to 50. And the Scrivener's error occurred when I brought the numbers down from that table. Instead of going collection on the table, it was disposal, collection, recycling, and I brought them down and they were collection, disposal. So those two numbers got transposed, but we're correcting that hopefully tonight. Directed staff to set the public meeting in June. On June 1st, meeting was to set the rates and the date for the public hearing. Presented a potential fee at 1/2 of the $330 per year cost, which is $165. You can see on this table the 2020 versus the 2022 numbers. And I have an asterisk there that You see this was revised at the time for it with a 2.5% multiplier. I brought that down a little bit. And so that resulted in a number that was slightly different than the higher number presented earlier. At the time we stated that, and it was our understanding that the assessment would begin in 2022 due to taxes being paid in arrears and other items. And we were, and I'll get to it in the next slide, but we were told later by the tax collector that that can change and it could actually be earlier. But at the time we talked about it being in 2022. The motion was approved to set the rate at $178, and the public hearing was set for tonight. So the 2022 issue, in previous meetings it was discussed on multiple occasions that this would have to start in fiscal year 2022. After the 6/1/20 meeting, the tax collector informed the city that it could actually go in place a year earlier in our fiscal year 21. The public meeting letters that went out had this listed, the potential for it to be implemented this upcoming fiscal year. It doesn't have to be. We can stick with the original discussion of 2022, but it certainly is within your power to start it in 2021. The letters went out stating that it could be.
So, Mr. Tredick, what tax bill would it show up on? The one that comes out this November? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
That being said, you may want to adjust it down by 2.5% if you want to stay at 1/2, but that's another discussion. So we're here today to take public comment at this meeting, July 7th. I'd like to correct those ranges so that they're reversed for the collection and disposal. The total amount of the assessment, the range doesn't change at all. It's just the breakdown between collection and disposal. And after that, we'll have to enter into an interlocal agreement with the tax collector for collection of the assessment. And that's really all I have as far as talking about the history. Have any questions or? Happy to answer any questions.
Commissioners on the phone, do you have any questions for Mr. Tredick? Commissioner George?
Thanks, Mayor. I believe you answered or asked the question I had about, the time. Just to clarify, to the extent of it appearing on this year's tax bill, that would be for revenue collected for next year. Is that my understanding?
Yeah, that's correct. Patty, when would those revenues start to come in?
So we would start receiving the revenues in late November, early December, because they would actually go on the tax bills in the beginning of November. And we typically start receiving our money.
The tax bill that is due January
Correct.
1, 2021?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So that would reflect a one-year acceleration. In other words, if it was originally planned to start in 2022, putting on this year's tax bill would be just a one-year acceleration. Is that, I'm understanding that properly?
That's correct. From what was discussed in previous meetings, yes.
Okay, so the 2022 timeline would mean it would be on the 2021 tax bill?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, all right, I'm following it. Thank you.
Any further questions, Commissioner George?
No, not this time. I look forward to hearing public comments and
Okay.
other commission questions. Thank you.
All right. Commissioner Rumwell, any questions right now?
No, I just wanted to make sure, I think Commissioner George asked the same questions, just wanted to clarify that it would be at the end of this year for next year and then next year for the following year. So I'm following and would like to hear public comment as well.
Okay. Commissioner Samora, anything right now?
All set right now.
All right, Vice Mayor.
I have no questions at this time.
All right, just to summarize, before we take public comment, is that we've worked on this a year, that we have tried to right-size our customers. We have reworked the commercial fees to bring them up to offset some of the residential fees. And we have moved large scale trash commercial customers beginning in October to dumpsters as appropriate. Again, trying to right-size our customers that the city collects from. We have moved rentals, short-term rentals, to commercial rates. And we have started, I looked at back, and we started a residential fee, and you've got in here $460, but I thought I saw something at $480, and we've reduced the cost down to the latest $330. And so we've done a pretty good job on this whole project over a year of trying to right-size our customers, reduce the fees, just to summarize everything. And for public comment, we have received your email. We have taken note of that. And Beverly, have you done any accounts or analysis summary on public comment on this item?
We've only had 2 that have come in for this item.
Okay. And they were, I think I saw an email from you.
They were mostly regarding the container sizes. They weren't saying anything
Okay.
about the cost.
About the recyclable containers?
Yes.
Okay, all right, which we'll take up when we review their contract. And so for public comment, we welcome you, we want to hear from you, and just a reminder to try to keep it civil, and your remarks will be allowed 2 minutes each.
Mr. Nick Binder?
Nick Binder, 232 Big Magnolia Court, St. Augustine Beach, Florida. Let's go back in history for a moment. The 2012 $74 cost that was assessed was before that assessed by the county, the same amount. At that time, the Public Works Director thought that the city of St. Augustine Beach could do it cheaper, so they took that upon themselves. Then they found out through other discussions that $74 really wasn't that bad. So that held that number. In terms of the non-ad valorem, I have to look at the big picture. You're talking 178, I'm looking at 375. Look at the homes, especially the smaller homes, that have ad valorem tax. Many of them will be paying less ad valorem tax than non-ad valorem tax because of the size of the home and the millage. So you're really going to be assessing smaller homes, apartments, condos, smaller homes, a higher amount for non-ad valorem than ad valorem. Also, those who have rental properties may have thought this was not going to go into effect till the following year. So many of those contracts are already set for people for next year's rent. So they'll do a catch-up. So you're going to be guaranteed a $100 increase for anybody renting anything in St. Augustine Beach. You also talk about container fees of $265. Now, if you do, hopefully the container fee will go up and match the fee of the $375 when you get there, because I'm looking that you're going to be going to $375. I also asked for a table months ago that would show what the effect would be on ad valorem versus non-ad valorem to raise the same cost. And I can talk out loud that maybe for a smaller home, it would be a $20 increase for ad valorem versus a $104 fee right now. And when you get to $375, you may be looking at a $60 cost versus a $375 cost. So again, please consider the effect on the smaller homes where they may be paying more non-ad valorem than ad valorem. Thank you.
I have no other speaker cards. However, if anybody who's here would like to speak on this item, we invite you to come forward and fill out a speaker card after.
Okay, all right. Commissioners, now it's up to us to consider. Commissioner Samora, can I start with you tonight?
You can start with me anytime you like, yes, that's fine. This has been a journey. This really has, Bill. Thanks for summing up the last year plus worth of work. It's been, I don't need to recap everything, but it's been a lot of work that's been done, a lot of ground that's been covered this past year. So, you know, kudos and thanks and appreciation to the staff that's worked so hard on this, getting us to this point. I still, I believe this is the correct structure. Nothing is perfect in this world, and our paying for our collection and disposal and recycling through ad valorem taxes is not a perfect system. This may not be a perfect system, but I believe this moves us closer to getting the fees or the taxes closer to where the services are being provided. And I think that was one of my main goals in when we started this journey, was to, again, we're providing a service, let's get the service paid for where the service is delivered. So I think this gets us closer. And another one of my main concerns getting into this was to be sensitive to some of the concerns that we heard in public comment. You know, we don't want to come and try to triple someone's tax bill. I believe the approach that we've taken, what went out with the public notice of trying to cover half of our costs, it hits a nice medium. It's not a huge increase for the smaller folks. There's going to be an increase anyway for the smaller homes, the $200,000 homes, let's say. I did do some calculations, Mr. Bender, and a $200,000 home may pay about it. There's no perfect way to calculate this because we haven't set millage, but it would be maybe $35 a year more this year. So I think easing into this and maybe scaling up our non-ad valorem over the next 5 years, 3 years, whatever we decide in the future or future commissions decide, I think is a nice way to do it so it doesn't shock anyone on their tax bill, and we're being sensitive to those issues. So I'll just address one other thing that came up, and there were questions of Mr. Tredick as far as doing this year versus next year as we anticipated. You know, it's been over a year. We'll be a year and a half into this by the time the tax bills roll out. Rarely in what I've experienced in government do we have a chance to actually accelerate things. So, you know, instead of taking 2.5 years to get this implemented, it would take a year and a half, and to me, that's welcome. You know, let's not just keep kicking this thing further and further down the road. Part of the reason we're in this situation is because 8 years ago, part of this structure was adopted and then never changed. It was never revisited. And it's actually in our codes that we were supposed to have the collection costs keep up with, or the non-ad valorem collection keep up, or disposal, whichever we're assessing now, keep up with the costs. And we hadn't done that. So I think we move ahead and get this out there sooner the better.
So, Commissioner, if we started this year, would you go with the 165 or the 178?
What went out in the notice? I thought it was
178.
178 went out in the notice.
Correct.
I'm not going to quibble over $13.
Okay, all right. We're just asking, okay. Anything else?
No.
All right. Commissioner Rumwell, can I get your comments on this, please?
Sure, thank you, Mayor. I echo very similar comments as Commissioner Samora. You know, if we did the calculation, I believe the county's at $250 right now. So say we went out to bid and got a bid back, and the county said, hey, you can piggyback ours, but it's going to be $250. Well, that would be a $176 increase opposed to what we're proposing today of about a $100 increase. So I think to Commissioner Samora's comments, which I greatly appreciate, you know, I think going back 8 years, had it been raised $10 a year for the last 8 years, I don't know if we'd be in the same situation. So I know it seems like a lot. I appreciate Mr. Bender's comments about the size of the house. I know a lot of houses are vacation rentals. There are some that are second homes, and there are large houses and smaller houses. And you know, I can't quantify how much trash each house puts out. I think the mindset is the bigger the house, the more the trash. And I don't see it that way. I think that, you know, there's a cost regardless of picking up the trash. And that hard cost, I think Mr. Tredick has done a great job of bringing it down. And I hope we can bring it down some more. I hope once our contract is up with Advance that we figure out how to do it in-house. And that's over $100,000 a year right there that we can save. It will cost us some money, but I believe we can do it better, more efficient, and cheaper than what Advance has done. So I'm looking forward to not extending or going out for a contract when recycling comes up. The majority of recyclables now, even though we feel good about it, is put into the trash. And so, are we paying double for trash? And that's another question that we're going to have to look at when that Advance contract comes up, is that a lot of that's going to the trash. So I support it. I think it's needed, and I think users pay users' cost. And this gets us closer to that number. So I'm hoping as we go up, the cost comes down, that we level out. Those are my comments.
Thank you so much. Commissioner George?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have really too much to add. I mean, we've been working on this for a long time. I've been opposed to adding a non-ad valorem fee on principle for a long time. I wish it was ad valorem so that the residents could get the modest but still tax deduction on it. I didn't support it in the outset. However, I have supported the methodology. I think that we've done a good job insofar as being critical about what hard costs we're actually looking at. The whole question about a staggered fee based upon size of the home or consumption, I really do feel like the staff has done a lot of good work, and I know, Mayor, you worked a lot on that as well, and determined from the analysis that, yeah, it costs just as much to stop at. It's more the per stop cost as opposed to the volume cost. So I'm comfortable with the methodology given the data that we've seen. I think that staff has done an excellent job getting all of that data. I don't like it, but I know it will serve a good function in the city. And, I do want to put on the record, we did get some public comments, some emails that were quite specific to this topic, and that they were in objection to. Back in December, I mean, we got, I think, a lot of mixed comments, some in favor of, some against. But there were a couple specifically where some of the residents had requested that this not go into effect this year because of COVID. They are passing off, when their tenants can't pay the rent, they are allowing them to stay and shouldering that benefit, as well as taking on additional costs. I think that's, it's tough because for the city, we know we're going to lose revenue because of COVID, but to ask the citizens to also shoulder more right now is a difficult pill for me to swallow. I would rather see it continue to next year, or at least significantly reduced this year because of the economic hardship that everybody is suffering right now. So, that would be my only real request or suggestion for going forward. Okay, that's it for now. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
So, as the other commissioners know, I am also, share the sentiments of Commissioner George and Mr. Binder. I think that there is a larger effect on a smaller home, and I picture it like this. If you have $100, giving up $20, it takes a little effort. If you have $900, giving up $20 isn't that big of a deal. And I know that the size of your house doesn't necessarily equal how much trash you pick up, but I believe that there lends a larger thought to that it does. I don't feel like one size fits all, and I also supported an ad valorem tax as opposed to non-ad valorem tax. However, we are where we are, and so I can support that. The staff and Mr. Tredick especially, and Patty have put a great deal of work and research into the materials that they have prepared. I also am concerned about the financial effect of COVID on the city as well as our citizens. And if indeed we had not projected to be able to collect this revenue until 2020, then if we even take a step back from doing the total now and maybe cut it back a little with plenty of public notice that we're going to take it in incremental steps, it may be a little bit easier for our community to handle that burden, because it still gives us more revenue than we were planning on having, which is zero, right? So we were already planning to not have increased revenue for next year. We were planning to be able to see this revenue in 2020. So if we cut it back a little bit, we'll still have revenue coming in 2021. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, we've worked hard on this. Our methodology, we have worked so hard to right-size the customers, to get the commercial brought up, and to move short-term rentals over to commercial, to bring down the fees for the residential, to ensure that the residential fee is, the commercial fees are never less than the residential fees. We have not increased the millage rate in quite a few years, so I'm not confident we would do that to cover the trash disposal and collection fees. So I am definitely in favor of a non-ad valorem tax that is similar to the county, but less. And because the city has so much on our plate in our vulnerability study, our WEIR, our stormwater management, as we've heard in other meetings, water is an issue, and we've got other issues. And so I think, in fairness to everyone, the non-ad valorem fee, talking to the tax collector, using number of bedrooms or square footage, that's debatable on how you do that, and our methodology, we've worked on that, and so I'm in support of charging the fee, a non-ad valorem fee, and starting it this year. I'm not sure if there's any kind of way, if there's a true hardship, that the city can waive anything. Patty, is there anything you know of that if there's a true hardship, can the city do anything?
The county does allow for that.
Okay.
We have not allowed anything in our code to cover that. When the county has a hardship, there's a form that the resident has to fill out.
Okay.
They do not make that decision. They hand that off to their health department officials for reasons of trying not to get into people's HIPAA information.
Okay.
So they do the research, they send it back to the county, and then the county makes that determination at that point. We could institute a similar process.
Okay.
But then we have to come up with some type of committee, and it has to be fair across the board, specific criteria. We just have not looked into any of
Okay.
that to develop it this year.
Well, let's look into that, because this is such an unusual year, and the unemployment rate and everything, and moratorium on evictions and things like that. Let's look into that kind of hardship in case it comes up. It may not, but in case it comes up. And that will also address some of the other commissioners' concerns about this if we start it this year. So I'm at unless there is further questions, we're at a point to make a motion and decide on this.
Well, I'll go ahead and make a motion to assess the non-ad valorem taxes as noticed for this year in the amounts of collection non-ad valorem of $87, disposal non-ad valorem of $67, and recycling non-ad valorem of $24. Is that correct, Bill?
Yes, but I wanted to ask the attorney something before that motion. Do they need to fix the ranges before they do this motion? Swap the collection and disposal? Because the $67 would be less than the 75 that was. So correct the scrivener's error first and then set the rates.
They can, that would probably be the better part of wisdom to go ahead and correct the range now at this public hearing and then vote on the imposition of the non-ad valorem fee to correct the scrivener's error.
Okay, so first we need a motion, okay. Then I will set that motion aside and make a motion to, I don't have the ranges in front of me, so maybe someone can help with that.
Yes, the range for collection would be 75 to 175, and for disposal would be 50 to 150. It was approved the other way originally.
Well, I would like to make a motion to correct an error so that the ranges reflect our intent of a collection range for non-ad valorem taxes of a minimum of $75 and a maximum of $175, and disposal non-ad valorem minimum of $50, maximum of $150.
Go back to that slide to make sure I got those numbers right. So collection would be disposal 75, 175, and
Let me amend my
collects
motion.
175 to 175 for collection, and disposal would be 50 to 150.
Okay, let me amend the amounts of my motion. Collection would be a minimum of $50.
No,
That's the way it is approved.
this is the error. The one that's on the screen is the error.
All right.
Your, what you
Apologies, I
stated
showed
was
how it was
correct.
approved in the past.
Correct, my
Yes.
motion then stands as originally stated. Okay, Bill, thank you. Commissioners, on the-
Okay, I'm just trying to
Trying to
keep up
keep up.
with this. So the collection
Would it help
is,
if I restated?
yes.
Okay. So this is a motion to correct an error in the ranges so that it more accurately affects what our intent was. The ranges on the non-ad valorem collection would be a minimum of $75, a maximum of $175. The ranges on the disposal non-ad valorem would be a minimum of $50 and a maximum of $150.
And then recycling.
Recycling would stay the same.
There was no error in recycling, so just to be thorough, the recycling non-ad valorem would be a minimum of $0 and a maximum of $50.
I'll second that motion. Beverly, roll call, please.
Yes, ma'am. Mayor England,
Yes?
Vice Mayor Casca,
Yes.
Commissioner George,
No.
Commissioner Rumwell,
Yes.
Commissioner Samora.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-1.
Thank you. Now that that has,
I will attempt not to transpose numbers in the future.
okay, thank you, Bill. Now I would like to bring back my motion that we assess non-ad valorem taxes this year as noticed in the amounts of $87 for collection, $67 for disposal, and $24 for recycling, bringing a total of $178 in non-ad valorem taxes.
I'll second that motion. So roll call vote, please.
Yes, ma'am. Mayor England,
Yes?
Vice Mayor Casca,
No.
Commissioner George,
No.
Commissioner Rumwell,
Yes.
and Commissioner Samora.
Thank you, commissioners, and let's look into that hardship in case that comes up this year for anybody. Okay. All right, that concludes the agenda item for the special meeting. Mr. Tredick, anything else for this special meeting?
No, Mayor.
Okay.
Can we adjourn the special and go?
Yes, so now I'll make a motion to adjourn the special meeting.
Second.
Second roll call vote, please.
Yes, ma'am. Commissioner Samora? Yes. Commissioner, Commissioner George?
Yes.
Mayor Ringling?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Costa?
Yes.
Commissioner Rumwell?
Yes.
We are adjourned.
Okay, so now we will call to order the continuation of the regular July 6th meeting from last night. And we don't need a roll call again on that, do we, or anything? Okay, so this is the continuation of last night's meeting. We stopped with, do I need a vote on motion to continue last night's meeting?
No, ma'am, you did
Okay.
that.
All right. So we are on we're going to continue our discussion on new business, the opening of 2nd Street, west of 2nd Avenue. We had public comment last night, and we finished public comment last night. So commissioners, unless someone feels very strongly that we need to open up public comment again, I'm just going to open it up for our deliberations. And we received other email today that I'm sure we've all read, but if we haven't had time to respond to everything, please keep in mind, it's been a busy couple of days.
Mayor England, if I could just add something, that there is mention in the Sunshine Manual to encourage public comment at a tabled meeting at which the actual vote will take place. So if it would be okay with you to, if there is any public comment, just out of abundance of caution, to permit that, because the vote will take place potentially take place at this meeting.
Okay.
It would
All right.
be better for that.
So if anyone present would like to speak again on the 2nd Street, opening of 2nd Street, please come forward and fill out a card later.
Mayor, I have a question before we do public comment, if you
Okay.
don't mind. Sorry to interrupt. I would like to table this item for proper notice for potentially the folks on First Street. I appreciate the folks coming from Second last night and sitting through our meeting, but if there's a opportunity that the commission would vote on pushing it through Second Avenue, I propose that we properly notice the residents on First Street because they were not noticed. The 2nd Street was noticed, but if there's an alternate route, I think for legal, and this is a question for you about doing that. But that's my suggestion, Mayor, maybe that we have, we put it on the August agenda for a vote, just to give fair notice to everybody.
Commissioner Rumwell, I appreciate your remarks. I think I'll go ahead and let some public comment come forward, because that, even if we don't take a vote, even if we do take action tonight, our attorneys are looking at me saying, go ahead and take some public comment, even if we take other action to get more information on this issue.
Okay, I just want to make sure that if we are looking at an alternate route, that just people are noticed properly, that's all.
Correct, all right, absolutely. So, Vice Mayor, if you want to see if you have any cards or anything for tonight.
I don't have any cards, but if you'd like to step up and fill out a card after you're finished speaking, feel free to do that. Thank you so much.
Hi, Chris Barquette, 114 2nd Street. I just want to make sure nothing was lost last night as we were being tabled after a long debate on the mask, an explosive incident that happened in this room. I'm sure, as you all know, safety is our #1 priority as to why we're trying to obtain an alternate route down our street. If you approve the opening of 2nd Street, then you've put a price on the citizens' safety of 2nd Street and of St. Augustine Beach. There should not be a price on safety. 2nd Street is very narrow. I know it's hard to tell by the pictures that we've sent you, that we've emailed to you. Really, to get a true representation of what our street is like, you need to drive down it. Commissioner George has done that. Okay, and you have to, we appreciate that very much. You can see how narrow our street is and how there is no widening available, and there's no sidewalk available to be put in either. Mr. Tredick stated last night that there's greater right-of-ways from the north and southbound access route, which would minimize impact on current residents, as there are no homes that front those access points, whereas there are maybe around 11 to 16 that are on 2nd Street that would be affected for the rest of the time we live there. Mr. Kinney had stated that he is not opposed to using an alternate route. He stated that he would possibly consider matching his contribution of cutting the road through to using it for an alternate route. So if he's willing to do that, that's perfectly fine, and that's a viable option for all parties involved. The other thing I would like to ask, and I don't know if this is pertinent to this or not, but he had stated that Mr. Howe, who's no longer with us, denied him the right to finish paving our street. So I would like Mr. Tredick to let me know, and everyone else know, how many times Mr. Kinney has contacted you to ask if he can pave that street, and when was the last time he did so?
Sir, we're not going to answer right now. We appreciate your comments, and we will do our best to get that information to you.
Okay, all right, thank you, I appreciate it.
Mr. Kinney?
Eric Kinney, 6 Oceanside Drive, St. Augustine Beach. I've kind of come under attack here for trying to do something that, I thought would be actually pretty easy. So I'm going to clear a few things up. I have not agreed to put my money towards an alternate route, because then I'm paying more than anybody else would be paying for the same access. I'm only willing to pay for the access coming off of 2nd Street in order to facilitate me getting the land that I have under contract, and for the people that want to throw their land into the process to get access right now, rather than waiting on all of everybody else to figure out when we're going to have the budget money to go ahead and get the access to this property. The other half of this is, Joe Howe's no longer here, but I have emails that I will provide with everybody. Not only was I told not to do 2nd Street, I also built houses on 7th Street. And those houses are not finished with pavement, nor were any of them finished past the properties that I built. And that was also a Gary and a Joe Howe issue that said, you're not responsible for that. We appreciate your offer. I was only doing this paving of the sections in front of the houses that I built in order to service my customers at the time. I was told by both of those gentlemen, and I've taken everybody at their word. I've completed everything I'm supposed to be doing in St. Augustine Beach. When I build the houses, I build them when I'm supposed to, and I deliver them. So the attacks are I'm getting a little bit frustrated with this. On the second part of this, every street, 1st, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, all the way through 16th, go all the way through to the end of their right-of-way. For everybody to now get all concerned that this is going to cause them an irreparable damage to their properties because they already are sitting there, I find that a little bit hard to swallow. The last thing is, there are some zoning violations of some of the people that have talked up here, and I'd like to put those into the record if you want. Otherwise, I can file them tomorrow with the St. Augustine Beach zoning office. Which would you like?
Max or Brian, what?
I don't mind if he wants to say it now, but it's your show. He's more than welcome in my office.
I think to keep things non-controversial tonight, I think tomorrow would be better to let those go.
If you have any other questions for me, I'm willing to answer any questions.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Kenny.
Thank you.
Mayor, I do have a question for Mr. Kenny. I'd like to know when he purchased or acquired the lots on 2nd Street.
I'm still under contract. I'm not purchasing them until we know what the access points are going to be and how long it's going to take for those points to be improved. So there's no purchase yet until somebody approves access, whether it's access by you guys and paying for it or access by me and I pay for it. So the answer is, I'm still sitting here after 6 years with properties under contract waiting for something to happen.
So just to be clear, are you not a current owner?
I am not. Not of those properties, no.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Sure.
I'm Jay Floyd, 111 2nd Street. I just came from the gym, I'm sorry. He has access. He has an avenue. It's been approved already. He can go that route. That is there for them. They're not being denied access. He doesn't like the cost of that access. That's his problem. He doesn't like the timing of that access. So I heard him the event last night. He wants to pop out the end of my street. All the greenery, the bamboo, that's my little clump of bamboo I planted there. And so we have done a lot for our street. He just wants to blow it up and blow right through it and affect the quality of life of 16 homes on 11 lots. Now, I don't know what these zoning violations are, but that's fine. Bring it up. That's great. But I'm not here to bash you, Mr. Kenny. We would rather you be a cooperative potential member of this community and appreciate we live there, and that's where we are.
Sure.
So, my email to you guys said everything I said. It really is a safety issue. It's about the least impact on existing residents. We've been there for quite a while. We will welcome those neighbors. We'd love for them to have a walkthrough down our street to go to the beach. That would be excellent. If you look at 2nd Avenue from 1st Street, there's a sidewalk that is on the far west against the greenery. You could put a road right next to that. You don't have to pull up the whole sidewalk on 2nd Ave. It's perfectly situated, it looks like to me, to rip up a portion of it, and you'd have a sidewalk on the left and a sidewalk on the right. It looks like it's fairly simple. Anyway, but I'm not an engineer and I'm not a building person, but I do live there. Our street is not anything special. There are some really nice homes there. My home doesn't look great from the outside, but we love living there. It's a condominium, actually. So anyway, we love living there, and thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Please fill out a card.
Thank you. Mark Craddock, 116 2nd Street. I want to say thank you for giving us the opportunity to address you. I know this is a really hard job that you do. Watching last night's proceedings was evidence of that. I did want to note that none of the property owners from these subject properties were present last night or tonight. There was an attorney present who claimed that he was representing certain property owners, but he did not disclose who those were. He made claims, but we don't know who he was representing. The developer who submitted the proposal, I think, was questioned by Commissioner George, is not a current property owner. Many of our neighbors were not properly notified about this issue. After the meeting last night, I stuck around and I learned that our street on 2nd Street is only 20 feet wide, which does not currently meet the standards that are required for streets, I guess, in the city. The other routes have wider streets, which would provide for more safety and access. I would ask that if that Second Street route is to be considered, that the cost impact of improving our street to the proper width would also be considered as part of opening the street up as part of the financial considerations, rather than just cutting through and keeping our street narrow. And then if the city is going to consider a route other than what has been previously approved, then I would ask that a more formal study be conducted to include a traffic study, an environmental study, and a green space analysis that can be used as a basis for a thoughtful and informed decision on this matter, rather than a knee-jerk decision based on one developer's wishes. So thank you very much for your time.
Okay, I think that's it. So, commissioners, I'm not sure how you all feel, but I know there have been 3 suggested options available, and people in other areas have not been notified, and I don't feel like we have the cost in front of us to the city yet. There's just a lot of information that has not been put forward, and we've got a tight budget. But in addition, there's a developer that, and it's common to make a offer to purchase contingent on perhaps a zoning issue that needs to be resolved. So that doesn't bother me all that much that Mr. Kinney is here, and yet he doesn't own the property just yet. It's contingent. So I'd like to hear from each of you on what you'd like to propose. I'm going to start with you, Commissioner Rumwell, because you have already stated you would like to ask staff to do a little bit more. And before we get going, staff, is there any other suggestions that you have on this topic, since we are lacking some information?
No, not as far as the route goes. Each one has some considerations that need to be looked at. Coming from the north, it would be a problem for emergency vehicles to make that turn unless the road is built fairly far towards the eastern right-of-way line. And then you can get the radius in there to get fire trucks and things like that down that block. That is not the fire department's preferred alignment. They would rather have it go straight through, because they would rather back up all the way out than to have to make tight 90-degree turns. And that was their position back in 2014. It's still their position. Brian, did you?
Just piggyback on what Mr. Treddick's saying, I did speak with the fire department unofficially, of course. Without a submittal, I won't ask them to do an official plan review. But the fire plan reviewer, that's our liaison over there, specifically did mention in an email to me that they would prefer to have a straight access, but they can do what they always do. In the event of a fire, they'll get there, but it may take them more time.
What I'm thinking of is very quickly that staff put in writing the 3 options and put some pluses and minuses on paper for each of those 3 options, and give us some estimated figures for the cost. And then perhaps we can, but we do need something in writing in front of us for all 3 options. And then on Second Street, the street itself, although narrow, and I was kind of the street itself is not where it should be. I mean, safety is number 1, quality number 2. What we owe the residents of Second Street as far as quality and all the way through, what we could do for them, the cost that it would cost us, especially safety, what we could do with that 40-foot right-of-way and sidewalks. I believe anytime we dig or do anything, we should perhaps look at underground utilities. I know that's asking a lot, but if we're going to do something, let's do it right.
We can look into underground utilities. I know there will be a cost to that.
I know.
It's typically fairly
I know.
high cost.
I know. And this may be things we have to do in stages, but we've got to put the different alternatives in writing, notify everyone affected, and pick the right choice, and then put the plan in writing, put it on paper, do it right so that, you know, the last commission did not finish the work. And so we need to do it right this time, I think. But I want my other commissioners to weigh in, so I'm going to turn to Commissioner Rumwell.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I have multiple concerns. You know, we've got a property owner who's trying to sell a piece of property, and to deny them access or to deny them a right, then are we on the hook to build the street at some point, whether it's Second, whether it comes in from the north, whether it be Second Avenue, coming in from the south from First. I don't want this to get into some sort of government takeover type legal battle where we're denying access. So I think we've got to figure this out fairly fast. I think we have to do that for the residents and also for Mr. Kenny, that we've got to let people know one way or the other. I don't want this to sit over top of us until October or November. I'd like to get kind of the ball moving regardless of either direction fairly fast, because, you know, we don't want them to lose the contract and then come to us and state that, well, the purchase and sale failed. So I think we're in a pickle. But proper notice, I think, Mayor, to what I said earlier and echoed by you, which I appreciate, for all the other residences, I think is a must. And I'm okay with the traffic study. I think it shows where the fastest in and out. I think it shows where fire can get in and out, and I think it also shows where we're dumping these people to. I don't know if the boulevard directly is the answer, if A Street's the answer. I mean, we've got a very busy intersection right there. So those are kind of my thoughts, Mayor, on this. I wasn't on the board, obviously, in 2014. So I'm eager to hear from, I think Undine probably was, so I'm eager to hear what happened then to where it's at today.
Okay, Commissioner George, let us know what you remember, and how you feel about this.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor, for your approach. I really like your approach about having things being put in writing. We do need more information. In particular, we need more information about what I recall being a very clear and very express and written policy for how to proceed with a request to open a street. First and foremost, the lot owners have to pay for it. Secondly, the policy that was adopted was acted upon in 2016 by the owners of 8th Street. In fact, we had crafted the policy specifically due to the requests coming out of some lot owners on 2nd Street. And I remember being very staunch advocate for ensuring that it was a universal policy so that it could be utilized by any other street in the city, because they knew there was 1 or 2 leftover streets that, you know, had the money, wanted to proceed, and, you know, didn't want to have to go back through all the channels, and we needed uniformity. Okay, so we did have the owners of 8th Street take us up on that policy. The details of that policy should really be provided to the commission so that we can see the precedent that the city has set in the past. Now, what I remember as to this specific site is that there has consistently been a majority preference for the west block of 2nd Street to egress and ingress south onto 2nd Avenue. And then that way it would take a little burden off of Beach Boulevard. Of course, it does address the concerns of the 100 block of 2nd Street. But there were a lot of reasons for having a general preference for that route. I do recall discussion at the time regarding access for emergency vehicles, but that it would accommodate the turn for those vehicles. Okay, so my recollection is that that had been kind of neutralized. Obviously, we would need some real information on that, and we would need to know if it's possible versus what's the preference, right? And not just possible like it's going to be difficult as we have it in Whispering Oaks, but can it reasonably be accommodated? As to the timeline, sure, of course, sooner is better. If we can eke something more specific out in writing. However, there's, to my knowledge, legally from the past as well as the present, there's no liability or burden on the city here, especially because, and I'm sure most members of the commission know, all of those lots on 2nd Street are extremely undervalued in terms of the sales price. Anybody under contract is certainly contracting for the well-known knowledge of this issue on the lot. So that would be reflected in the price. But I don't think that it would be necessarily appropriate for us to deviate from a policy that was set regarding the, how many property owners need to agree and how the cost gets distributed. Certainly, the city should not at all be stuck with a bill that has been universally applied in the city, and we should absolutely not deviate from that today, regardless of what the outcome is. There are a number of ways for the residents who are impacted, either being benefited directly or indirectly from this type of a project, can be assessed for the impact. I believe the mechanism we used for 8th Street was that the city compiled all of the specs and cost list and cost sheet. And then but prior to breaking ground, the lot owners all had to either write a check or utilize a process where the city would recoup their share over time through the property tax bill, maybe with a modest interest. But at all times, there was never an expectation that the city would pay 1 penny, because that has always been the developer's cost. And we should not give any property owner today a special benefit that all the prior developers did not get to enjoy. So I do think that if the commission wanted to put something in stone to direct the traffic on this street, after we get that information, and our city attorney can correct me, but I think we do have ordinances that outline some traffic patterns. Might be off on that, but I had in mind that procedurally, if there was a decision to be made, that might be a mechanism for doing that, and then it's up to the developers, whoever they are, to then fund it when they're ready. But we could essentially proceed with at least resolving the question of which route is going to be in the best interest of the community and for public safety purposes. We could resolve that issue first, and independent of anything else, and then, proceed to, simultaneously as well. But I see those as 2 different issues. I don't think that they should be blurred. I think we need to make a conscientious decision about what's best for the safety and well-being of the community and traffic patterns based upon, data. And second to that is the money question. I believe the city resolved the money question, like I stated earlier, in the 2016 policy. So I'd be happy to answer any specific questions, but that's my summary.
Thank you, Commissioner George. I remember listening to those hearings, and I do remember the policy is that the homeowners along the street would bear the cost of the pavement. And Mr. Kenny has offered to pay some of that too. Okay, Commissioner Samora.
A lot of the same sentiments, I guess. These comments about noticing the neighbors on 1st and 3rd, I believe Well, first of all, the approach, Mayor, I like. Let's reevaluate all three routes, pros and cons of each. Let's do that in a timely manner. We need to do this expeditiously. This stuff is time sensitive. The decision that was made 4, 5, 6 years ago may not apply today. The complexion of those streets have changed. We have a lot of parking going on First. I know there's concerns about the traffic that's already there coming off First Street. So I think we need to reevaluate it. But I think we need to get through this process quickly because if we take a year to make this decision, the interested parties may not be around. It may sit around for another 5 years, and then another commission is going to have to go through the same process because Second Street may not look like it does today, or Third Street may not look like it does today. So there is a time-sensitive nature to this, and I don't think we need to underestimate that. So let's move along quickly. If there is a policy out there, let's see what the policy is. I think you have your recollection, and Commissioner George has her recollection. I'd like to see that. If there's a precedence, let's follow that. Certainly notice the folks on First and Third because they will be affected or they have the potential to be affected. And that's all.
All right. Commissioner, Vice Mayor.
Ironically, I remember this, and as Commissioner George was relaying the version of how the commission meeting went, I was actually at that commission meeting because I was on the agenda for a business-related issue. So I remember this issue clearly, and I recall the same principles that Commissioner George brought up. And I think that the reason it never went anywhere previous was because they did not have all the property owners willing to contribute to the development of the road. So nonetheless, I also agree that we need to kind of take into consideration all of the options, but all of the options include properties that weren't noticed. And so I think that the sooner that we do that, the sooner that we can take the different considerations under review and make a recommendation. But I also feel as though we do have something on record that we are not obligated to pay for the development of the road, that the property owners are obligated to pay that expense. But I'm willing to look at different alternatives. So yeah, let's move this along if we can.
And our attorneys, do you have anything to add to this discussion with regard to the previous commission meetings and any kind of precedent that would be set by the 2014 meeting in particular?
Yeah, the precedent by the 2014 meeting is not binding on this commission. You guys basically are looking at this brand new and fresh. There are some statutes, or not statutes, but codes that have been adopted and ordinances that prescribe how streets are supposed to be designed. I think staff is probably pretty familiar with them. I would agree that speed would be something, and I think some of these general numbers would be important. I don't want to, I don't believe the city has a lot of protection to do what it wants. The longer you take, that's when I would be concerned about legal actions. So time is the threat in this situation.
Okay, all right. I am concerned, Mr. Tredick, we keep a lean staff, and you have lots of issues on your plate. I know, the Lee Street and the recent flooding and everything. Tell me what we have asked you to do with perhaps help from, what do you need to get this done as quickly as you can to outline the three options with perhaps the things we have talked about tonight?
So I could outline, outline the three options for the next meeting. That won't be a problem with the pros and cons, and at least have some sort of sketches to look at. They may not be, I don't think we have survey everywhere out there. We have some older survey for Second Street that we can use, so I can come up with some sketches. That's not a problem for next meeting. A traffic study by next meeting is not doable. In fact, a traffic meeting will require expenditure of funds. I'm not a traffic engineer. It's a specialty field. in order for someone to analyze the traffic patterns and come out with a recommendation will take some time and probably several $1,000s. So that is an expense. In order to go forward with that, someone will have to pay that. If it's the city, I would need your blessing to move forward with that. If we're trying to get the developer to do that, that would be another option.
I personally don't feel that strongly on the traffic study, but if a commissioner feels that we should do a traffic study, I'm going to give you a minute. Please speak up. Commissioner George or Commissioner Rumwell on the phone, do you feel that we need to, in order to resolve this quickly, do we really need a traffic study right now?
This is Commissioner George here. I trust staff. They're trained in this area. It's not a major intersection. It's a minor one. And they've got, county resources and other colleagues available. I would be comfortable with, their learned opinion on it.
Commissioner Rumwell?
No, I'm fine. I think that's a good idea. Timing was my concern as well, and the city attorney has answered that question for me. So I think the faster, the better for us.
Okay, so no formal traffic study at this point. If you can get an opinion from someone or something, fine, but as part of your pluses and minuses for each route.
Certainly, I can look at the alignments and see what works, what doesn't work. Look at the radiuses of the intersection, see what works, doesn't work for larger vehicles. As I said before, there's pros and cons. There's pros to going straight through for the safety of First Street too, because now an emergency vehicle can get there and go out as opposed to having to back up. So, there are pros and cons to all options here, but I can certainly present all three, give you all those pros and cons, along with some sketches at the next meeting.
Okay, that sounds really good. For any of the commissioners that are interested, please be in close touch with our Public Works and offer help anywhere you can on this one. And let's make sure we get all the facts down on paper and do whatever we can to really make a good decision and move forward as quickly as we can, because streets and access are kind of one of the basics of municipalities. Now,
And proper notice.
Right.
Please be sure we proper notice all of the affected or potentially affected addresses.
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
For the attorneys, do we need to make a motion, or is general direction to staff sufficient for this item?
Yeah, we feel comfortable with staff direction.
Okay, great. Okay, so then Second Street, we finished our discussion on Second Street, and for the developer, Mr. Kenny, we try to, your patience is appreciated, and we will get to this as quickly as we can. So thank you. We're going to move on to the next item, which is the St. Johns County Legislative Action Plan.
Didn't we have number 8 under old business, accessing private property from dead-end streets?
And number 7.
Oh, we got to go back up there?
Yes, we had jumped ahead.
Okay, all right, that's right,
7?
that's right. The vulnerability assessment. Okay, yes, thank you all.
No presentation, but I'll close this one. Not sure how maybe IT can help me get back up the commissioner's information on the screen. Yes, this is agenda item 7, amendment 32 to the contract with CMT, formerly known as Stone Engineering, to conduct the City of St. Augustine Beach Vulnerability and Assessment and Adaptation Plan. Basically a study to look at our vulnerabilities from sea level rise and storm surge. We applied for a grant from the Florida Resilient Coastlines Program last year, and we were notified that we were expected to get an award for that. While I don't have the final documents yet, the governor did not veto this, so I expect we will get this grant. I got an email from them that it should be coming shortly, but that don't initiate work until you actually get it. So we're perfect timing to move forward. The grant is $72,500. It does not require a city match, so it's fully funded by them. It does some nice things. It updates the city GIS system with drainage and topographic mapping. It'll update the city master stormwater model to include new data. And it will synthesize these results and come up with some improvements we can do to improve our adaptation plan and improve our resistance to sea level rise and storm surge. We, in our application, we listed CMT, our continuing contract engineer, as the engineer doing the work because they have a detailed knowledge of the city. They already have a city model, so they don't have to start from scratch. They're basically going to modify that model. It's a very short time frame. It starts up as soon as we get the revenue agreement with DEP signed, and it has to be done by April 30th, 2021. So we got to hit the ground running and move very quickly. I expect that this, also one other thing, we're going to be working with the Northeast Florida Regional Council on the outreach and have some public workshops so that the public is involved in the development of this plan. Today, we want to approve this amendment, Amendment 32, to the contract with CMT so that we can move forward with this plan as quickly and expeditiously as possible. On a side note, what we get out of this plan is going to be very, very useful in addressing the Lee Drive problem. The information we'll get by that updated model will be directly applicable to improving the drainage in that area. So there's going to be a lot of benefits throughout the city from this updated model. And I'll take any questions.
Is CMT the same company, Stone Engineering, that is involved in the weir?
They are.
So the anticipated cost for them to do this work, what is it, Mr.
It's $72,500, which is the grant amount.
And that has been, you've reviewed it, and is this a solid, this is no?
Bring it to you, because I wanted to be sure that there wasn't any issues with the cost from the time that we designed the grant application to the time that we got the proposal for the amendment from them. So they have tailored their amendment with that cost in mind, or their scope with that cost in mind.
And has our attorneys looked at this amendment?
Yes.
You have, okay. I just wondered, usually in the first paragraph when you do an amendment, you reference the original contract you're amending?
It's an assessment, not an amendment.
Okay. That's all my questions. Commissioner Samora, do you have any questions?
Do you have anything written into the actual contract with them that would cover us if they don't complete the work on time? I'm assuming if they don't complete the work on time, that could affect the grant.
I would have to do a little research on that and get back to you what language is in their original contract. I don't have that committed to
I would
memory.
just ask that we make sure we're covered on that. And of course, that we don't start until the money's in the bank.
Yes, and I will say that if we selected somebody else, we would have to change our grant application, and we would also probably be challenged to get this done in the time just because of developing a model from scratch.
Commissioner Rumwell, any questions?
No, Mayor. In the essence of time, I'm willing to make a motion so we can have further discussion for Commissioner George and Vice Mayor Casca for the essence of timing with the rest of the agenda tonight to approve the contract with CMT. And I think the clause that Commissioner Samora make sure that there's no outside expenditures to the city, and any change orders as well, if there's anything like that, and with the review from our city attorney for them to do the Florida Resilient Coastline Program grant for the vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan.
Okay,
Commissioner
so-
Rumrell, did you mean to include in your motion, the comment Commissioner Rumrell referenced about having some protection if the timeline is not met and the city loses the grant?
Yes. What Commissioner Smore had said, I would like to add his comments to the motion that would protect the city to not start the project until the grant, and then also the timeline, and I would like to add to that any change orders that may occur because of that.
I'll second that motion.
Vice Mayor?
Yes.
Any comments?
No, yes, I think we had a motion and a second, so I think we're ready for a vote.
We are. Okay, Beverly?
Yes, ma'am. Vice Mayor Casca,
Yes?
Commissioner George,
Yes?
Mayor England,
Yes.
Commissioner Rumwell,
Yes.
and Commissioner Samora.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay, then our next item would be accessing private property from dead-end streets. And this goes back to the issue we had on Pyrus Street. And I met with the residents along Pyrus Street and the people on Blueberry Street. And Mr. Law, if you bring us up to date on everything.
Yes, there has been ongoing neighboring disputes between Bluebird Lane and the end of Pyrus Street. This goes back well past the last year. There was a new house being constructed on the north side of Florida Avenue. It was stalled due to financing reasons and was extended a permit under my authority. And they continued, and since then, they've been bickering like children, and they won't come up to we were here, we saw it all. So we were tasked with coming up with a ordinance that we could enforce. So I made a very generic ordinance, and it's going to pave the way for future rights-of-way permitting, which the city will engage in that sort of permitting down the road, time permitting. So of course, I will always give exemptions to any rule for governmental vehicles, because we don't know when the police have to get there or the fire department have to ride through the end. But this does bring up the right-of-way permit, and the rights-of-way are controlled by the Public Works Director. I deal in private properties, he deals in public. So that authority resides in him, and at our meeting that the mayor had, it was to not exceed 30 days for a fee of $250. So it's very basic. If the commission agrees with this, we can proceed with preparing an ordinance, and at some point we'll prepare a one-page application. This money will go, even though my staff will most likely handle the issuance of a permit because of the complexity of the permitting software, the money will not reside in the building department. It will go to the general funds, into the road and bridge, whatever finance director sees fit. This is of no consequence to the software. It can handle it. I just have to spend a couple of days telling it it's a building code. So other than that, it's a very simple solution.
Normally, we set our fees in a fee table by resolution.
Yes, ma'am. You currently have a building and zoning fee table, and that is something that I don't believe this is a building or zoning fee.
Okay.
It doesn't mean we can't create another one which will also bring in the future rights-of-way permitting. So it doesn't hurt to have another city fee schedule, but the building and zoning, now if you want to put it there and say it's zoning, I don't think that's where it belongs. I think it belongs in a separate city fee schedule. But this doesn't actually hurt, it's just sitting in the ordinance. So it's whatever the commission wants to do. So we can, we have to start at number one.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Law? Commissioner George?
Do we have kind of a list? Did you look at a list, Mr. Law, of all of the right-of-ways that are relevant to this proposal?
Ma'am, that would be almost every street that doesn't connect us. I'm looking at your picture, but I know I'm not looking at you. That would be almost every street that doesn't connect. That would be the end of 7th Street, 8th Street, 9th Street, 10th Street, the ridge where Hyde The ridge is a loop, so that would work. I wrote it where basically it's any street that's affected. For me to list the streets would be very cumbersome, and I'm sure we would miss some, and that would be a loophole that somebody could utilize.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean necessarily to have it here. I was just wondering if you've analyzed them all, whether there are any that were kind of missed in a community somewhere around the city.
I can tell you the old streets
Other than on the boulevard. I mean, I think the numbered and lettered streets the numbered streets in particular are kind of obvious, but any others?
Yes, ma'am. There are three that I know of. They're on A1A South. They're Florida, Cassia, and Pyrus. All three of those streets are very old platted streets that fall in the beach districts, and they dead end. Ironically, I believe all three of them dead end in Island Hammock. So this one issue happening at the end of Pyrus Street could happen at the other two streets.
These are ones that dead end up against another residential property.
Yes, ma'am. I believe all three dead end in Island Hammock. Two of
Okay.
them dead end in Bluebird Lane. I forget what the other one goes. But this same situation, this ongoing year and a half of staff time trying to mediate, could replay itself next year. So
Okay.
this would allow at least the government to have a mechanism to control the rights of ways at the dead end streets, and it would put it under the control of the Public Works Director. He has a better option to see what, if anything, is under the ground, and it would, it gives the people the right to apply to help us if we have to go in there to build a pool or some magnitude. We can get the equipment in there and get it back out as to minimize the impact on the current residents.
Okay. Commissioner George, anything else?
No, I don't think so.
Commissioner Rumwell?
Thank you. Mr. Law, I would, with the commission, obviously, if they will buy into this notion, I think for the Pyrus Street specific, I'd like to see one of those like horse fence type mechanisms there, because I don't want our law enforcement to be called, even though we have a mechanism in place, doesn't mean that people are going to adhere by it. So instead of burdening our law enforcement, I'd like to figure out, at least for Pyrus Street, and maybe we can do it on a case-by-case basis. But I think for this specific street, I think one of those little horse fence type things that can be removed fairly easy if there needs to be access with a right-of-way permit. Do you agree with that?
I agree with mostly what you're saying, and I do recommend if we do construct these, we don't set the poles in concrete for the same reasons you mentioned. But I would recommend, let's say a street's 20 foot, we build 2 8-foot and leave a pedestrian walkway right in the center of it. Then we're only pulling out 8-foot sections in lieu of a 20-foot contiguous fence. I would recommend 42 inches tall, 6x6s, and 2 rails, 2x4s with 1 2x6 cap. And we can even stain it white. $100.
I was just going to say, I think for this street, Mr. Law, sorry to interrupt you, I think for this street specifically, because of the problems that we've had for a year and a half, I think that would stop any issues from law enforcement to go to it. I was going to ask Chief or Commander if they've had any more calls since, Mayor, you've had the mediation and such with them.
That would be yes, sir. If we don't go a day without a call, and I'm not exaggerating, then it's out of the ordinary.
Okay, so probably having some sort of mechanism like a fence there would probably alleviate your calls, because then they will know when the fence come down that a right-of-way permit has been pulled. Would that be easier for you, Chief?
And I apologize, Commissioner, we're having calls for service, not really kind of, the end of Bluebird and Pyrus has been a little quieter. It's now just Pyrus among the neighbors on the street.
Okay, so Pyrus would be probably a good spot. So if the commission is in agreement to that, I think for this specific one, Mayor, I think to put something up like Mr. Law has suggested, I would be supportive of that.
Okay.
Mayor, is this something that the commission needs to vote on or, take action on?
Madam Mayor.
It wasn't noticed. I certainly would recuse myself on the issue of the specific street. I feel like I'm certainly a part of the conversation as to a general ordinance that universally is applied. So I don't mean to speak to the substance of it, but I do question procedurally whether it's even something the commission would need to act upon, or whether that's something staff would have inherent authority to deal with. That's my question.
Mr. Law, I think you wanted to respond.
Yes, ma'am. If you recall from our meeting we had in this room several weeks ago, we did give the Bluebird Lane people 60 days to complete their work. At that point, the Public Works Director was authorized to construct a small permanent barricade that could be removed with proper right-of-way permitting.
Right, I believe the barricade is an administrative action and should be given the authority through Public Works
Yes,
to
ma'am.
put those wherever needed to.
Public Works Director has complete authority. It would cost about $100 apiece. Staff
Right.
time would be utilized for it. And there's no reason for the commission, in my opinion, to take any action regarding the dead-end rights-of-way streets.
Right, and so this is a change to our ordinance?
This is-
And so you would have to, we'd have to have the regular, go through the regular, if we agree with your language tonight, we go through the regular procedures.
Yes, ma'am. If this commission's wish, we would ask the city attorneys to generate the ordinance. It would come back next month. It would go to the P&Z the following meeting, then it would come back for 2 more months of hearings because it is a change to the land development code. But this gives the mechanism for us to enforce a rule. And this is, once again, just like our dune ordinance. This is a whole new program in the infancy. We have to start somewhere, and this is how it begins.
Okay. Commissioner George, does that answer your questions?
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
All right, let's see, Commissioner Samora?
Yes, just one question. The permit as proposed here is a 30-day permit for $250. What would be the process for extending that? Like you mentioned building a pool, that's not a 30-day process, so what would be the mechanism?
They would have to reapply for 30 days. And a pool, if the pool contractor moves, can dig the hole, get the shell poured, and after that, it's basically bagging the marshite and the finish in the pool. But if they need a second one, they would have to pay for it. And once again, the Public Works Director would have to weigh in what's going on at the right-of-way. Is it an issue? Do we have planned maintenance going on at that period? Something of that magnitude. Now, if you want to put in, just like building permits, we do extend building permits. We don't charge the full weight of the permit. We charge basically a revision fee with a letter explaining why you need an extension. So currently, we charge $53 for that in the building world. If that's something you want to do with an extension up to 30 days approved by the Public Works Director for a fee of $53, that's
I
very
just think
fair.
we need to address what the mechanism is going to be. That sounds a little bit more palatable, like, $53 versus a whole $250. I don't know if we want to put a limit to the number of days, and I just want to make sure it's identified, whether that's under your purview or Public Works, so.
Everything will be under the Public Works because it is public property, but I feel confident my staff is better suited to issue the actual permit because the software is not a simple software, and only my side deals with the true permitting side of it.
Okay. Anything else? All right, Vice Mayor?
Thank you for doing this and taking the step forward. I think it establishes some clear guidelines which were lacking. I had hoped that we could have some kind of amicable resolution between Pyrus and Bluebird, but it is what it is. But thank you for putting this together. I think it's a great, it's very clear, gives the guidelines.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I believe from the comments and the consensus is to move forward with the ordinance procedures.
Yes, ma'am, and I will include Mr. Samora's comments, so you will see it all next month in an ordinance format.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. All right, so now we are back down to number 11, St. Johns County Legislative Action Plan.
Yes, you have before you a letter from Mr. Conrad, the county administrator. Each year, the county asks us for our input for their legislative action plan. I provided the letter that I sent last year that was based upon what you approved, listing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 actions. So this year, since there is a deadline of July 24th for us to submit our proposals for the legislative action plan 2020 rather, that I bring this to you to see what you want to do. For the sake of the public at home, if anyone's watching, the provisions were continue state funding for beach restoration, respect home rule for cities and counties, allow cities and counties to regulate short-term and vacation rentals, provide funding to cities and counties to make themselves sustainable, and for planning to cope with sea level rise, provide more funding for the Florida Forever program, to help cities and counties purchase environmentally sensitive land, encourage through funding and state leadership non-vehicular transportation such as river to sea loop, support Visit Florida so the state remains competitive with other tourist destinations in the country, and provide funding for mental health facilities to help distressed people and possibly prevent acts of mass violence. So we could keep the same list of projects or recommendations, or we could have changes to what's provided.
Mr. Royal, do we know if any of these were actually funded for the county?
Well, I don't know particularly for the county. I do know the county does receive money each year for the beach restoration through the TDC funds. That's not the state legislature, though. The Florida Forever program, Governor DeSantis was much more aggressive about funding, getting funding from the legislature for it this year than his predecessor had been. And I read that the Florida Forever program is purchasing the Fish Island property with St. Augustine. Obviously, that particular request has generated income. River to Sea Loop, I've not heard anything. Support Visit Florida.
That was refunded.
That was refunded, okay. Commissioner Samora says. I don't know about the mental health facilities. Respect home rule is always something that comes under fire each legislative session, and was more so this past session, particularly concerning short-term and vacation rentals. But fortunately, counties and cities prevailed thanks to the League of Cities and other forces, and the legislature did not curtail our ability to regulate those types of.
Well, I would definitely support continuing state funding for beach restoration. We have, even on our beaches now, we have some rocks on, near the pier that are beginning to become exposed, and that's like about 2 years too early.
Yes.
Max, perhaps we can combine home rule with the short-term rental, combine those two, because I would like to add something on water quality and stormwater management without increasing the list. If we could combine home rule and short-term rentals and then add something on water quality, sea level rise, and stormwater management. We sure could use some help on some stormwater management funds.
Mayor, I have a question, if I may ask through you, Mayor.
Sure.
You know, I think it's great that we put an action plan through the county, but I think we need to stand alone as our own municipality here in St. Augustine Beach and advocate for us as well with the same representatives. So taking what you had just mentioned, why don't we add, instead of deleting what we have here, is add the important stuff that would directly affect the city of St. Augustine Beach, like you said, stormwater stuff, and let's legislate, or let's go to the legislative action plan, and let's stand alone as St. Augustine Beach. And, you know, have the county give them kind of a broader list like we have, but now let's let's put together a list that will really, not that this won't help St. Augustine Beach, I don't want you to take that the wrong way, but I think there's some special ones, Mayor, that if we stood on our own, I think we'd have a better chance of fighting for it as our own municipality.
Okay, let's see, what's our deadline on this? And
July 24th.
July 24th. Commissioner, do I hear you volunteering to help put a list together, and then we can send it out to the commissioners for authority to sign the letter?
Yeah, I'm fine either way. We can put a list together, and if you would all email maybe Max, and then Max and I can work together, Mayor, on that list, and then get that circulated before the 24th so you can sign that letter. But I just feel from talking to folks in Tallahassee, I feel we may get a little bit more footsteps forward by standing on our own as a municipality, because the county is going to ask for theirs as well, and I don't want to be shortchanged for our municipality directly.
Mayor, I have to echo the same concerns. It's simply a matter of lobbying. And while I think it's critical for us to take advantage of the county's lobbyists and lobbying efforts and stand united with them, there's no harm in, and there never has been any harm in us absolutely directly communicating our legislative priorities. So I think the only question is the how. Whether, it just means that we need to reach out directly, as well as respond to the county's request within the county's deadline, but then take the steps to do the direct lobbying.
Okay.
So I think your idea of a letter is a good one, because that can be the, the starting point. And then certainly, if we all utilize our contacts, I don't think we have money in the budget to be hiring any professional lobbying groups, but certainly if we utilize our contacts, that would be good. And I do have something to add to the list, which the county would not care about at all, although they would probably want to take a position on it, and it might be opposed. But I would propose that we make specific reference to a request of a legislative amendment to allow municipal tourist development tax. I certainly don't expect it would ever be granted in the next year or two, but that conversation really needs to be had at the state level, even if it's going to be a very narrow consideration at some point down the road. I do think that there's traction for it. There's certainly a need. We can't be, held hostage by the county's TDT. Other states allow municipal tourist development taxes. It could be done in a way so as not to harm the tourism that we have here. So I would like to propose that, and hopefully I have the support of my colleagues here on the commission for that measure.
Commissioner, do you happen to know whether St. Augustine has suggested that? Because it would make sense if we both wanted something like that.
Yeah, well, I know, I haven't talked to Mayor Upchurch about it. I have, maybe I did right when he first got appointed. But I had extensive conversations with Mayor Shaver about it, and she was behind it as well. Thought it was a good idea. I'm sure there are dozens of other cities. Okay, I know I'd heard whisperings of it here and there, under the grapevine, not through it.
So Max,
it's definitely building momentum. There's so much need for it.
Maybe perhaps we can check what St. Augustine is putting on their list, because we are uniquely, as far as tourism and things like that, we do share some things, and together we can, and we may differ from the county, so we're more unique and together as St. Augustine.
Okay.
Any other commissioner want to suggest something?
I have nothing to add, and I like the suggestions that have been made so far.
Okay.
I have nothing more to add, and I appreciate the bold suggestions.
All right, so
So,
yes, sir.
to clarify for myself, in terms of a letter, I assume that all these that I've listed here will be sent again.
Right.
With the exception, well, I'll combine the respect home rule and allow cities and counties to regulate short-term rentals.
Right.
Otherwise, everything else will remain unchanged. And then Commissioner Rumwell and I will work together on a list of priorities just for our city.
Okay.
We can work with
And
Cindy
Max,
Stevenson.
I'd like the input of other commissioners, because I think
Yes.
what Commissioner George said is spot on. If we can utilize that, and I know the county tried to impose a tax for tourists that was actually supported by the TDC and also the chamber. Unfortunately, it did not pass, but I think that it's important that we support that if it comes back up. And also, if they aren't willing to do it, for us to look at it. So Commissioner George, that's a great idea to add that to the mix.
Thank you.
Max, any?
Nope, that's the direction I got.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Okay, so we are good with that one. Our next agenda item is the Florida League of Cities Annual Conference and our voting delegate.
Yes, alas, I'm afraid that the three of us, the vice mayor, the mayor, and me, there won't be a conference this year in terms of being in person. The hotel where it was supposed to be held, I heard, was closed.
Everything has changed.
Yes,
So I think the league wants a virtual business meeting. And so whoever you designate as your voting delegate, that member of the commission would be participate in that virtual meeting to vote on the resolutions that the league is going to propose. So it's a matter of you choosing one of your members.
I've done it the past couple of years, and I'm not the greatest on virtual meetings, and so if someone else who would like to volunteer to do this, I definitely will step aside and let you have that unique, wonderful experience.
Well, would the vice mayor want to do it, just as far as rank goes? If that, I'm always willing to step up, but I would, defer if somebody else is interested.
I have no preference either way. So if no one wants to do it, I will of course do it. Sure.
Is there anyone else? I mean,
anyone with a deep desire to do that?
Make a motion and appoint Vice Mayor Casca to go ahead and do this.
I wasn't trying to put you on the spot. I just heard silence there, and I didn't want to step on any toes, so sorry.
I'll be happy to be our delegate. Thanks, guys.
Okay, I think by consensus, I don't think we need a vote on this. By consensus, you get that experience this year for a virtual meeting. All right.
Another stripe or star.
Okay, and then our last is setting a date for the next meeting in July, another meeting in July, right?
Yes, but at the end, so you'll have a break. Ms. Patty is working diligently on the budget, so we hope to have that to you fairly soon.
Sorry.
But usually you hold your meeting at which you set the tentative millage on the last Monday in July. Of course, I don't know your schedules, I don't know if you'll be in town. Then, we are facing a deadline in terms of getting the information to the property appraiser by the first week in August. Then we'll put on the tax notice that goes to every property owner in the city. So really, the end of July in that vicinity is when we really have to hold that meeting. We can't really have it sooner because Patty needs time to put numbers together. We need time to brief you individually on the budget as we did last year. So I suggest the last Monday, which is the 27th, depending on your schedule.
Any objection to the last Monday, July 27th at 5:30? Anybody have a conflict with that date? Since I hear nothing, I'm saying that we will go with that date.
7/27 at 5:30. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so we are doing well. Staff comments, let me start with the city manager.
No, only to say thank you for 2 days of meetings, of which a great deal was accomplished. Appreciate getting the clear direction from the commission on some significant topics. Other than that, I have nothing more to report.
Our finance director, how's the budget coming?
It's coming slowly. Unfortunately, the state revenues will be delayed. They're just starting the conference now to roll out the estimates for next year. And as, usual, it will start trickling in. So the initial budget that we talk about on the 27th may not have firm numbers yet from them, but I will give it that old college try to get them in there as best I can. We have received our revenue in from the state for our sales tax, and that was for the month of April, which we know should be the worst due to COVID, and it was about $20,000 light of what we normally would receive. So, my opinion, it could be worse. But it's certainly a challenge now to finish out the latter half of the year with projects that we need to do and making sure that we're covering everything that we need to. And it is estimated, I believe, the shortfall in revenue for the state of Florida for the month of May. April was $848 million, and I believe May's was $653 million. So it got better, but still at a loss. So we will not receive that money in until probably the last week of July to have that information.
Do you know what the percentage was of that in April, percentage of the shortfall?
It was about a third. So actually, it was better than what I had forecasted because I forecasted gloom and doom, not intentionally, but because everything was shut down. So I was trying to be, very cautious in my estimates. So we did come in better than my estimates, but again, it's still a shortfall. And then, of course, we had 1 month. They took half of our state revenue share for the month of May and half for June. That was approximately $17,000. So roughly $50,000 so far at a loss. And again, those numbers are through April. They typically run about 60 days behind on when we receive the money in our pocket. So we'll just keep pushing forward. Our spending is still at a halt as needed. I'm sure, Mayor, as you've seen from signing the checks, they're minimal at best. So we're doing well at trying to curtail the expenses to offset the revenue. So hopefully it'll turn out well, and then things will come around for the new fiscal year.
So I know things opened up, got better for a while, but then now people are concerned about getting out again. So we could be looking at a longer period of diminished revenues than we were
Yes,
before.
we very well may, yes. I'm trying not to look that far ahead.
I know.
I'm trying to be positive. We're going to turn,
Right.
Turn everything back around.
Right.
So, and then we did apply for the TDC grant for beach blast-off. We did receive notice today that they have it. They're going to start their review process in the next week. So we should be hearing something probably by the end of the month on where we stand with that.
Okay, all right. Our city clerk, Beverly.
We did go out to bid for all the medical insurance, and we had that come in July 1st. We are putting everything together, and we should be bringing that to you on the budget meeting. So hopefully you'll see how much the actual amount for insurances will be.
Any sneak peek? Are we looking at big increases or anything?
Actually, we're looking to decrease. So I'm keeping the same current information, same current values that we have.
Okay.
So I'm hoping we're putting it all together, and we'll see what you all think.
Okay, all right.
Looks good.
All right, Mr. Tredick?
I talked yesterday about the ocean walk, so unless anyone has any questions, I won't mention that again. But we did very well this year on grant applications. I reviewed the governor's veto list, and I didn't see any of our items on the veto list. That being said, I have not heard yet from the FERDAP, the Florida Recreation Development Assistance Program, but I expect to hear from them very shortly. When I hear from them, that will mean Ocean Hammock Park can finally move forward. So that's good news. I'm not going to, count my chickens till they hatch, because I haven't heard from them yet, but it wasn't on the veto list. Same thing with the Resilient Coastlines. Actually, I have heard from the Resilient Coastlines program. I mentioned that earlier. The Coastal Partnership Initiative grant, which is actually a NOAA grant, I have heard from, and they're moving forward. That's a $25,000 grant to design the next phase, the interior of the Ocean Hammock Park. So to design and permit that, so we're going to be moving forward with that. And of course, the Mizell Weir grant, which is the big one for the year, is subject to the final Water Management District budget in September. But I have not heard anything that would lead me to believe that that's in jeopardy. So things are doing well grant-wise. We're still waiting on FEMA final approval of construction for the Weir so that we can enter into a contract with FEMA or with FDEM, Florida Division of Emergency Management, to get that money. I don't expect any problems, but FEMA tends to take some time. So things are moving. Have a lot of things that are going to start up here very shortly. And that's it.
Mr. Law?
I have nothing additional other than what was in my memo for y'all.
Thank you. Chief, would you tell us about the presentation today?
Sure, Mayor. As you and I met with my staff, Commander Ashlock and Lieutenant Harrell last week, to discuss some things to do with civil unrest and what's going on in our country, what's going on in our...
Well, no, I meant our really nice presentation this afternoon. If you could
I'm so sorry. We'll start with that. Okay, We'll start with that presentation. On May 23rd of this year, we actually had a woman, her older son, 14-year-old son, and they had a friend down from Atlanta that were visiting out of state. And she actually entered the water, and she got into distress, and she was actually being pulled out by a rip current. She actually told her oldest boy, Ty, to go ahead and take the friend in, Gia, which he did, and she continued to struggle with the rip current. She was actually pulled in the rip current. A guy named Rod, I'll leave his last name out, they were visiting from Atlanta, and he saw her in distress. His little son, Rod's little son, actually was paddling on a boogie board and said there was a woman screaming for help in the ocean. Rod entered the water. He actually lost sight of the woman that was actually in distress and drowning, and she lost consciousness and went underneath the water and actually was in a wave, 75 to 100 yards offshore, maybe a little less. He entered the water. He literally took a stab in the dark and jumped into a wave and actually found her body underneath the top of the water. He dragged her back into shore. Two ladies on shore, Leslie and Leanna, two nurses that didn't know each other, one from Wolfson's and another local hospital, actually went to work on her and performed CPR, which was spot on and literally saved the woman's life. She was transported by St. Johns County Fire and Rescue to Flagler Health Plus, and the woman had a 0% chance of making it when she actually was pulled from the ocean, and she was actually saved. So it was impressive. It was an emotional day. Congressman Waltz actually came here. Of course, Mayor, you were there too as well, and our city manager, Max Royal, and a bunch of our staff, and Chief Pravat. And it was an emotional day because that was the first time that Kelly had actually met her rescue individual, which was Rod. And it was pretty, like I said, it was emotional. So there was a lot of tears shed down there. It was just a good thing that she was physically there. She was at Flagler Health Plus 3 days in the hospital with a 0% chance of recovery, and she walked out 3 days later and has a full recovery. It's impressive. It was pretty impressive, and our men and women were a part of it too as well.
And the city presented plaques to the people who did the life-saving, the nurses, and the young man that pulled the friend in, and to the other gentleman who really at a distance, swam out there and brought Kelly back in. I tell you, it was a privilege to be invited to be there, and it was emotional, but it was a good thing. It was uplifting. And it was a wonderful, wonderful
It was actually interesting,
presentation.
because in the parking lot, they had not met each other, just spoke on the phone after the incident actually occurred in the hospital, and they united in the parking lot. It was very, like I say, it was an emotional day. It was pretty, she's alive. And the big thing, of course, like Michael Waltz, Congressman Waltz said, was, it's a mother with a family and a husband, and, being in combat, just like the congressman, and you don't get a chance to see that with our families go to us. You see men and women die in combat, and you physically see a mother on the beach with her child and children and can't do anything besides, rescue her own children. It's a great story.
So just when you think we're pulling ourselves apart, here comes this wonderful life-saving story.
Sure. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'll let you continue.
Sure, I apologize.
Any update?
I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am. So, Mayor, as you know, you met with myself and my staff last week, and just open discussion about some things that are going on in our country, our nation, our county, our city, and just some things. There was 3 things you actually brought up, and myself, Commander Ashlock, and Lieutenant Harrell actually sat down. The big thing you brought up, of course, was the policy review process. As you all know, we're accredited by the Commission for Law Enforcement Accreditation. This will be our 6th year being accredited. We actually go through that process as we speak. There's one thing, though, we do a little bit out of the ordinary, is my command staff meets every year around February timeframe to include our accreditation team. And we actually meet off-site, usually at St. Johns County Fire and Rescue Headquarters. And we go through every single policy and procedure, looking through best practices, legal updates, and guidelines. And we try to do what's best for the city of St. Augustine Beach. We try to make our own stamp and not rubber stamp it, per se, for our policies and procedures. So we've been doing that since I've been your chief. And, the big thing this is something personal to us, because if it's a policy in place that we're not using or we're not doing, then we go ahead and change it to what fits the St. Augustine Beach Police Department. So again, we've been doing that process for the last 8 years. Through the accreditation process, it's a third of the agencies in the state of Florida, a little over 300 police departments, 67 sheriff's offices, and we're part of that third, part of that 30%, that is accredited, and we take it personal. We do something that no other agency does that I know of. We bring in the Florida Department of Law Enforcement every year, and they physically do an inspection of our policies, our procedures. They do ride-alongs with our men and women. Again, it's one of those things where we've had an unblemished inspection by the Commission for Florida Law Enforcement Accreditation for 6 years in a row, so it's become personal to my men and women, and my men and women take it, to the next level by doing above and beyond. The other thing we do is through the Florida Police Chiefs Association, the Florida Sheriff's Association, and through the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, we maintain those legal updates and legal guidelines. My men and women get constant emails from me with any kind of case law that comes out. Commander Ashlock's been very good about our Power DMS system, where he puts that legal update on there. And actually, he will do a quick quiz or something based on that legal update. And again, stuff that pertains to us and is pertinent to our job here in St. Augustine Beach. We also have a great relationship, our law enforcement agency does, with the men and women of St. Johns County, whether it be the prosecutor's office, whether it be the county lawyers, attorneys, or whether it be criminal defense attorneys here in St. Johns County. We got a great relationship with them, and that's how we, I think we're probably the only agency that brought in the supervisor from the public defender's office to inspect the inside of our evidence and property room. Probably unheard of. So that's how much we believe in our men and women, and we trust them. So Norma Went came in and did an impromptu inspection without our men and women knowing about it. She's done that twice, I believe, so far. And again, it's probably unheard of to have a public defender or a defense attorney in our evidence room doing a impromptu inspection. So it's something with a lot of pride and stuff we do. And again, that's what you had asked me about, was policy review process. So I think we go above and beyond. I got a bunch of men and women that, again, take this profession personal. They take working for the city of St. Augustine Beach personal, and also they're very loyal to our team and our concepts over there. The second thing you asked me about was training, specifically, sensitivity training. That's an interesting topic for, law enforcement. We have so much training we have to keep up with based on the, not just the Commission for Law Enforcement Accreditation, but for our individual standards through CJSTC, or Criminal Justice Standards and Training Commission. As you know, I serve as a commissioner on that currently under Governor DeSantis. I was appointed by Governor Rick Scott, and I'm still on that commission as we speak until I expire. So with that being said, again, it's one of those things where we go above and beyond because we have that direct link with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. With the accreditation team, we kind of put it all together. So, the sensitivity training, it's easy to go online and take a course. It's easy to sit into a class and say you got to check in the box. But the real training comes with on-the-job training. We deal with situations every day. You can't look at a book and memorize it and figure it out. And that's where our men and women just, again, they got to learn while on the job and making that split-second decision and listening to senior members of the agency and that mentorship program that we have with the men and women. I will tell you this, we're proud to have some of the finest females in law enforcement that have been around in my profession. I hate to use the word produce, but they've gone to do bigger and better things in this profession. You know, we now have 2 female sergeants in our agency, which does fit the demographics of St. Johns County with over 50% being female population. So we've slowly swung that pendulum to law enforcement professionals. So back on the sensitivity training, you know, we encounter difficult situations every day. And then the other part of that is situations that is just customer service based. Well, out of that 0.1%, is where use of force is being used. So all of those calls for service that we have is a very small percentage of that where use of force is actually applied to a person. Just even last night, we saw in here, even though there's a heated conversation going on, I'll call it that, they still comply. They both walked out of here and they might be upset, they might be angry, but they still complied. And we appreciate that. So that's a relationship we have. I could list all kinds of classes that we take. You're more than welcome to come see their files, but just to name a few, besides our annual in-service training, you know, which is 40 hours that every officer does, including myself. I go every single year with Commander Ashlock and my command staff. Verbal judo is a big thing. You know, that verbal de-escalation has become part of our profession now. And Mayor, you and I talked about, things in this profession that really the tools we have in our belt, the most important is the tool that's in your mouth and speaking to people and using a dialogue and just simply listening sometimes to what they have to say. But, there's classes in ethics and law enforcement. There's domestic violence. There's, of course, firearms is one of our key things. And I think the more we actually put our hand on our firearms and we actually qualify, shoot scenario-based, less times we're going to actually take that firearm out unless we now have to use it. So we've been truly blessed next door with having a staff of, again, men and women as sergeants that just do a good job, and they lead by example. So, again, I have a whole list of things here that we take online through. Mental health is kind of our shift right now. There's whatever trends going on in law enforcement, we kind of have to, shift the trends to our training. So right now, of course, as you're paying attention to what's going on with civil unrest, we're having to, things that we've never dealt before. We've never had COVID-19, we never had civil unrest, and, in our profession, or my profession, I have dealt with protests since I worked for the historic city when I was a police officer downtown, and with the Florida National Guard, Commander Ashlock and I have dealt with civil unrest and protests as guardsmen. So just some things, this morning in my office that was, really humbling to sit there and talk to these 2 ladies where we discussed autism, and she talked about her autistic son. And we have a guy named Joseph that's 18 years old now. He's driving his own car. He's working at a local restaurant here in town. But my concern is he's driving a car. I've known him since he's a young boy, but he gets pulled over by a police officer, and he's high functioning, autistic, but still, though, he gets nervous around anybody besides his family. So we have to take to a different level and do this training. But the only way to do that is to bring Brittany, this lady that met with me today, her son Lorenzo, who's 8 years old, who's autistic. Bring him in and let my men and women, learn from him or her. So we got to get more involved in this. But again, it's easy to take a class, but we got to do a lot more hands-on training. We're getting better, but we always have more areas to improve on. And the last thing you talked about, Mayor, was actually body cameras. Of course, there's the conversation across America right now, and I know Commissioner Samora had brought it up too as well as the Vice Mayor and both commissioners on the phone. This has been not a topic of questioning of what we're going to do or not going to do, but some things that I will tell you this, that I'm proud that our agency can tell you that Lieutenant Dan Carswell did research on body cameras in 2018, I believe, or the beginning of 2019. It was an assignment I gave to him when he was taking a senior leadership course with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. He asked me for a project, and I said, absolutely, let's go ahead and do the research on implementation of cameras. I want pros, cons, costs, case law, and storage, what it's going to take to implement cameras. And this was done back in 2018, if I'm not correct, Commander. And that was something that we did just on our own. And we provide that information to the historic city of St. Augustine. We provide the information to the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office over the last few months. Again, it's been a lot of meetings and verbal, conversations on this topic, but we've done the research on it. We're listening to you, my bosses, all 5 of you, but we're listening most importantly to our community and hearing their voices in there. So, one thing I'm not going to do is make a promise, that can't be kept. And that's one thing, Mayor, you've mentioned numerous times, even tonight, that we have some constraints on our budget. And I'm not going to use that as an excuse here, but we've done the pricing on this. Again, Commander Ashlock, myself, Lieutenant Carswell, and Kathy Harrell have done this. So, one thing is, through a cost-benefit analysis, the easiest way to do this is if we were to do it just like we have our current system, which actually tracks our police officers through our CAD system and our Smart Cop, that cost-benefit, that cost-sharing helps our taxpayers and helps our tax dollars, especially during this time of year when we're listening to our CFO saying, we're going to have a shortfall. We just don't know what it's going to be. Our governor's saying we're $1.9 billion or $1.7 billion short on revenue sources. So with that being said, again, the body cameras, I'm open to it. Of course, in this profession, you can never say no to anything because it's changed. It's changed since, the first of the year in January with what's gone on, and it continues to change. And we're not done yet either in law enforcement. There's a lot more for us to come. We got some challenging times ahead, but I'm listening to you. Again, I work for you, but most important, I work for our, taxpayers here in St. Augustine Beach. So I'm open for questions. Again, and I do want to mention one thing that occurred last night. There was an allegation made against one of my police officers of excessive use of force. Today, I ordered an internal affairs investigation opened by Lieutenant Dan Carswell. He's working it. We've actually found out a little bit that we don't believe it's occurred since I've been your chief of police. We believe it's some years back, so we're trying to track backwards of when this might have occurred. I have a great relationship with that lady that made the complaint last night, I thought, because we've come up through the Boy Scouts of America back in the day, or all our kids came up to that together. So I'm very surprised that this is where we found out about that complaint. We don't take those complaints lightly here. You know that very well. And again, I'm surprised with the complaint last night. So he's reached out via email today, and we got a couple of phone numbers that were provided by Mr. Royal. So again, it's an internal affairs investigation for excessive use of force, but right now we're tracking quite a few years back, maybe even outside the dating of our system of tracking for our Smart Cop, which is over 10 years ago. So again, we're on the case. It'll be public record when we're done with it. So any questions, please?
Commissioners, I wanted you to know that while this was a hot topic, and the news changes all the time, but I started some discussions with the police chief and his personnel, and I just wanted to bring you up to date and give the chief an opportunity to present this to all of you, to let you know that he's on it. As a city, we're on it. And if you have any questions, for those on the phone, Commissioner George?
Thank you, Mayor. A lot of my questions were answered by the chief. Chief, I know you've really always been very active and pursuing these issues. I remember the research you did on the body cameras in the past, and I know you've always been intolerant of excessive force in the department, so I appreciate your efforts to look into all of those. Thank you so much for your service.
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
Commissioner Rumwell?
No, I just would like to applaud Chief and his staff. It's kind of like anything, and I'm not a military person. I've never served, and I am thankful for those who have, including our chief of police. And, it starts from the top. And, for Chief today to take time out of his day to meet with somebody of a new initiative for children with autism, that just shows you what kind of a staff that he has built and what kind of human being Chief is. I'm very excited for where the direction of this agency is going. I think our women and men of law enforcement here at the beach are very well respected. I appreciate the relationships that they have with the county and the city of St. Augustine. Very rarely, as you know, Mayor, that different municipalities work together, and it's hard to develop that relationship. But I believe that is because of our leadership with our chief has brought us to that point. He's done an outstanding job. Everybody I've talked to in the community just praises what this department has done, how safe they feel here in St. Augustine Beach, the response time. I mean, it's unbelievable, just what they have done and how they do it. There was a lightning strike in a neighborhood here at the beach just a couple weeks ago, and I will tell you the first people on the scene was Commander Ashlock. And so, just things like that may go unnoticed. Our police officers have resuscitation equipment in their cars, and usually they're first on the scene. And I'm not discrediting our wonderful men and women in fire rescue, but, our police department is not just stopping the bad guys, for lack of better terms. They are also helping our citizens of St. Augustine Beach. So Chief, I can't stress how much I appreciate the working relationship I've had with you over this last year and a half, and continue to look forward to many years of working with you at whatever level you may become. So I just want to say thank you again, Chief, and thank you to your staff. I applaud every one of you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate it. But again, I got to thank my staff. I got some of the best men and women that are so loyal to this profession, and the relationships that I have here in St. Johns County. I've been truly blessed. So, with that, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Vice Mayor, any questions for the chief?
I think that I don't have any questions. I think Commissioner Rumwell spoke quite eloquently of all of the sentiments in our community and our county, fellow city, and I have a great admiration and respect for your department and everything that you do there. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Commissioner Samora, any questions? We went through some tough topics, the chief and I, and we really covered everything, and I want you all to know that we covered everything.
And I appreciate that. I've got no questions, only further accolades. So Chief, you've done a phenomenal job. We appreciate it. You really have built an agency over there that is to be looked up to by all other agencies, countywide, statewide. So thank you. You're always so humble, but you deserve a lot of credit.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate it. And again, I always challenge you too every year when you do, or whenever you do my evaluations, that don't talk to me, talk to my men and women. And a majority of you have spoke to them in confidentiality, and I appreciate that, because that's what you find out truly of what the men and women truly are invested in this city. And again, I can't thank them enough. They're some of the finest I've ever been around in my profession.
Thank you, Chief. To our city attorneys, any comments, questions, anything you'd like to add? How you've survived the last couple of days?
Nothing at this time.
All right, thank you. Commissioners, thank you all for the last couple of days, staff, commissioners, city attorneys, everyone. Good job, and I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Call the roll call.
Commissioner Samora,
Yes.
Commissioner George,
Yes?
Mayor England,
Yes?
Vice Mayor Costa, and Commissioner Rumwell. We are adjourned.
Yes.
Thank you all. Thank you all.